The Arizona sun beat mercilessly upon the small ranch nestled in the valley between red rock formations. Sarah Winterhawk Reed hummed softly as she tended her vegetable garden, her long black braids swaying with each movement. At 26, she had built a good life here with her husband Thomas, far from the prejudice that plagued those of mixed heritage in larger towns. "Sarah," Thomas called from the cabin porch, his warm smile visible even from a distance. "I'm heading into town for supplies. Need anything special?" She straightened, wiping soil from her hands onto her apron. "More seeds if they have them. And maybe some of that peppermint candy you pretend is for me but always eat yourself." Thomas laughed, the sound carrying across the yard like music. After 5 years of marriage, he still made her heart flutter. He was a kind man, a former schoolteacher from Boston who had come west seeking adventure and found love instead. Together, they had carved out this peaceful existence, asking nothing from anyone except to be left alone. But peace, Sarah had learned, was a fragile thing in the territories. As Thomas's wagon disappeared down the dusty trail, Sarah returned to her work. She didn't notice the riders approaching until their shadows fell across her garden. 6 men on horseback, their faces hard and weathered, guns prominently displayed at their hips. "Help you, gentlemen?" Sarah asked, her hand instinctively moving toward the rifle she kept near the garden gate. Her Cherokee mother had taught her to always be wary of strange men appearing without warning. The leader, a scarred man with cold gray eyes, spat tobacco juice into her carefully tended soil. "Name's Silas Blackburn. We're here on behalf of Mr. Victor Thornton. He's made a generous offer for your property." Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd heard of Thornton, a wealthy rancher from back east who was buying up land throughout the territory, often through methods that skirted the edges of legality. "This land isn't for sale." Blackburn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Thornton ain't used to hearing no, ma'am. He's offering $500. That's more than fair for this patch of dirt." "This patch of dirt has the purest spring water in 50 miles, Sarah replied steadily. "My husband and I built our home here." "We're not leaving!" Another rider, younger with a cruel twist to his mouth, laughed harshly. "Ain't much of a home. We could build you a better one, right before we burn this one down." Sarah's hand closed around the rifle, bringing it up smoothly. "You need to leave. Now!" Blackburn raised his hands in mock surrender. "No need for that, ma'am. We'll go. But you should know, Mr. Thornton always gets what he wants, one way or another." They rode off slowly, deliberately, their casual arrogance more threatening than any direct assault. Sarah watched until they disappeared before rushing inside to bar the door and windows. Her heart hammered as she loaded additional weapons. She needed to warn Thomas, but Thomas never returned from town that day. Sarah found him the next morning. His wagon overturned on a steep section of trail, his neck broken in what the town sheriff insisted was a tragic accident. No one believed it was an accident, but no one would speak against Thornton either. The wealthy rancher owned too many officials, held too much power. Numb with grief, Sarah buried her husband in a grove of cottonwoods near their cabin. She stood over the fresh grave, Cherokee prayers mixing with Christian hymns, when Blackburn and his men returned. This time, there was no pretense of civility. "Last chance, half-breed," Blackburn snarled. "Sign over the deed or join your husband." Sarah ran for the cabin, but they were faster. Rough hands seized her, dragging her back as others doused her home with lamp oil. She fought like a wildcat, landing kicks and scratches, but there were too many. "Should have taken the money," one of them said as Blackburn drew his revolver. The gunshot echoed across the valley. Sarah felt the bullet tear through her shoulder, spinning her around. She fell hard, her head striking a rock. Through blurring vision, she watched flames consume her home, heard the thunder of departing hooves, felt blood pooling beneath her. Darkness claimed her, and Sarah welcomed it. But death was not ready for Sarah Winterhawk Reed. She woke to the smell of sage smoke and the sound of chanting in the Cherokee tongue. Gentle hands tended her wound while cool water touched her cracked lips. Slowly, painfully, consciousness returned. "Uncle?" she whispered, recognizing the weathered face of Gray Fox, her mother's brother whom she hadn't seen in years. "Rest, little one," he murmured in Cherokee. "The spirits guided me to you. 3 days you have wandered between worlds. Gray Fox had brought her to a hidden canyon, a place sacred to their people, where a small stream fed lush vegetation and ancient pictographs decorated the stone walls. Here, away from the encroaching white world, the old ways still lived. For weeks, Sarah drifted in and out of fevered dreams. In them, her mother spoke to her mother who had died when Sarah was 12, but whose voice she remembered clearly. "You carry the blood of warriors," her mother said. "You carry the spirit of our people. Rise, daughter, rise and reclaim what was stolen." When the fever finally broke, Sarah found herself changed. The grief remained, a constant ache in her chest, but something else had awakened within her, something ancient and powerful. "Your body heals," Gray Fox observed one morning as Sarah walked the canyon unaided for the first time. "But your spirit? That requires different medicine." He began teaching her the ways he had learned from their ancestors. The Cherokee had been warriors long before the white man came, and though many of those traditions had been suppressed, Gray Fox had preserved them. Sarah learned to move through the forest without sound, to read tracks days old, to use the land itself as a weapon. She learned the pressure points on the human body that could disable or kill. She learned to enter a meditative state where pain became distant and focus became absolute. She also learned the stories of Cherokee women warriors throughout history. Women who had fought alongside men, who had led war parties, who had defended their people with courage and cunning. These stories fed the fire growing within her. "Revenge is poison," Gray Fox warned as Sarah practiced with knife and bow. "It will consume you if you let it." "I don't seek revenge," Sarah replied, her voice harder than it had been before. "I seek justice. For Thomas. For myself. For every family Thornton has destroyed." Gray Fox studied her face for a long moment, seeing the steel in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Finally, he nodded. "Then I will help you prepare. But remember, justice must have purpose beyond blood. What will you do after?" Sarah had no answer to that question yet. First, she needed to survive what was coming. 3 months after the attack, as autumn painted the canyon walls in brilliant colors, Sarah stood before Gray Fox dressed in clothes he had made, buckskin leggings and tunic dyed dark as night, moccasins that allowed silent movement, a medicine pouch at her belt containing herbs and sacred objects. Her black hair, now cut shorter for practicality, was bound back with a strip of red cloth, the color of the warrior. Traditional Cherokee face paint marked her features in patterns Gray Fox had carefully applied. "You are ready," he said simply. Sarah nodded, checking the weapons she carried. A rifle taken from one of Blackburn's men who had attacked her, a cavalry revolver. Several knives, including a traditional Cherokee blade her uncle had forged specifically for her. And most importantly, the knowledge her uncle had imparted. "What will they call you?" Gray Fox asked. Among warriors, a new name marked a new identity. Sarah thought of that terrible night, of fire consuming her home and hopes. She thought of the cold determination that had replaced her gentle nature. "Winter Storm," she said. "They will call me Winter Storm." As she prepared to leave the canyon, Gray Fox placed his weathered hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud. Your husband would understand. But Sarah, do not lose yourself in what you must become. Remember who you were." "I remember," Sarah whispered. "That's why I'm doing this." She rode out at dawn, leaving the sanctuary of the canyon behind. Ahead lay a path of danger and probable death, but Sarah Winterhawk Reed, now Winter Storm, rode toward it with clear eyes and steady hands. Silas Blackburn and Victor Thornton had taken everything from her. Now she would take everything from them, piece by piece, until justice was served or she died trying. The hunter had become the hunted, and the outlaws who had left her for dead would soon learn the terrible mistake they had made in underestimating a woman with Cherokee warrior blood in her veins. The town of Red Mesa sprawled across the desert like a scar on the land, its buildings weathered by wind and sin. Sarah observed it from a ridge overlooking the valley, noting the movements of people below through the spyglass Gray Fox had given her. 3 months of tracking had led her here, to Blackburn's favorite watering hole. She had spent those months learning everything about her enemies, Blackburn's gang consisted of 6 men besides himself, all hardened killers who hired out to whoever paid best. Currently, that was Victor Thornton, who used them to intimidate homesteaders into selling their land for pennies on the dollar. Sarah had also learned Thornton's game. He wasn't just stealing land. He was positioning himself to control all the water rights in the territory. With Arizona's fierce droughts becoming more frequent, whoever controlled water controlled everything. Her spring, the one Thomas had died protecting, was the keystone to Thornton's entire plan. As darkness fell over Red Mesa, Sarah made her way down the ridge, moving like a shadow between rocks and brush. She wore dark clothing that blended with the night, her face marked with the warrior paint her uncle had taught her to apply. To anyone who saw her, she would appear as little more than a trick of moonlight. The Silver Spur Saloon glowed with lamplight and rang with rough laughter. Through the window, Sarah spotted her first target. Jake Reeves, the youngest of Blackburn's men, the one who had joked about burning her home. He sat at a corner table, cards in hand, whiskey at his elbow. Sarah waited with the infinite patience Gray Fox had taught her. Eventually, Reeves stumbled out into the alley to relieve himself, too drunk to notice the shadow that followed him. "Jake Reeves," Sarah said softly in the darkness. He spun around, fumbling for his gun. "Who's there?" Sarah stepped into the moonlight, letting him see her painted face. "Do you remember a cabin you burned 3 months ago? A woman you shot?" Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by fear. "You're dead." "We left you. You left me to die," Sarah interrupted. "That was your mistake." Reeves finally cleared his holster, bringing his revolver up. But Sarah had already moved, impossibly fast, closing the distance between them before he could fire. Her knife found the gap beneath his ribs, angled upward toward his heart, just as Gray Fox had taught her. "This is for Thomas," she whispered as life faded from his eyes. She dragged his body deeper into the alley, positioning it to look like a drunken man sleeping off his liquor. By the time anyone found him in the morning, Sarah would be miles away. Over the following weeks, Blackburn's gang began to shrink. Clem Davis disappeared while riding fence line on Thornton's northern property. His horse returned riderless, no body ever found. The tracker Thornton hired to find Davis discovered only strange footprints that seemed to vanish into solid rock. A Cherokee trick Gray Fox had delighted in teaching Sarah. Pete Morrison was found dead in his bedroll one morning, a single puncture wound over his heart, his own knife lying beside him. The territorial marshal ruled it suicide, though everyone knew better. Something was hunting Thornton's men, and fear began to spread. "It's the ghost woman," whispered the Mexican workers on Thornton's ranch. "La Llorona has come for them." "Nonsense," Thornton blustered to Blackburn in a meeting Sarah overhead from her hiding spot in the ranch house rafters. "There are no ghosts. Someone is targeting our operations, and I want them stopped." "Whoever this is, they know things," Blackburn said, his earlier confidence shaken. "They know our movements, our routines. They move like smoke." "Then hire more men," Thornton snapped. "Double the guards. I don't care what it costs." But Sarah had learned from her Cherokee ancestors that the best defense was often useless against an enemy who refused to fight conventionally. While Thornton fortified his main ranch, she struck at his outlying properties, freeing workers he'd been cheating, destroying falsified land documents, even stealing the strongbox containing bribes meant for the territorial governor. Each action was calculated to hurt Thornton financially and expose his illegal operations. Sarah wasn't just seeking revenge anymore. She was building a case, gathering evidence that even corrupt local officials couldn't ignore. She also made allies. Former Sheriff Ben Cooper, forced into retirement by Thornton's machinations, proved receptive when a mysterious woman appeared at his door one night with documented proof of Thornton's crimes. "This is enough to bring federal marshals in," Cooper said, studying the papers Sarah had collected. "But how did you—" He looked up to find himself alone. The woman had vanished as silently as she'd arrived. 6 weeks after Reeves's death, Blackburn's gang was down to 3 men besides himself. Thornton had tripled his personal guard, turning his ranch into a fortress. But fortress walls couldn't stop the psychological warfare Sarah waged. She left Cherokee symbols painted on buildings Thornton owned. She shot arrows into his office window carrying messages written in English and Cherokee. "Justice comes for the wicked," she ensured. Witnesses saw a dark-haired woman in buckskin moving through the night like a vengeful spirit. The territory began to call her Winter Storm, though no one knew her real identity. Stories grew with each telling. She was 7 feet tall. She could disappear into thin air. She was a Cherokee war chief seeking revenge for ancient wrongs. Sarah neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. Let them think her supernatural. Fear was as effective as any weapon. The confrontation she'd been building toward came on a cold November night. Federal marshals, responding to the evidence Cooper had provided, surrounded Thornton's ranch with orders to bring him in for questioning. Thornton, realizing his empire was crumbling, chose to fight rather than surrender. Sarah positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the ranch, watching through her spyglass as the situation unfolded. She could have simply let the law handle everything now, but Blackburn was still inside, and Blackburn had personally pulled the trigger that killed Thomas. As gunfire erupted between Thornton's men and the marshals, Sarah made her way down to the ranch complex. Chaos made the perfect cover. She slipped through defenses focused outward, moving through the main house like a shadow. She found Blackburn in Thornton's office, stuffing money into saddlebags, preparing to flee while his employer and the remaining gang members fought the marshals. "Leaving without saying goodbye?" Sarah asked from the doorway. Blackburn spun around, his hand dropping to his gun. When he saw her, painted, armed, eyes burning with cold fury, his face went pale. "You! It's been you all along." "Did you think death would stop me?" Sarah asked, advancing slowly. "Did you think you could murder an innocent man, destroy everything I loved, and face no consequences?" "It was just business," Blackburn said, his earlier bravado gone. "Thornton paid us to kill," Sarah interrupted. "To steal, to leave me for dead. But I survived, Silas Blackburn, and I've spent these months learning to be what you made me, a hunter, a warrior, a force of justice you cannot escape." Blackburn drew his revolver with the speed of a practiced gunfighter, but Sarah had already moved, closing the distance between them faster than he could track. Her knife deflected his gun arm up, the shot going wild, and then her other hand found his throat with the precise pressure point Gray Fox had taught her. Blackburn collapsed, gasping, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Sarah stood over him, her blade at his throat. "This is for Thomas," she said. "For our home, for everyone you've hurt in your miserable life. She could kill him." She wanted to kill him. Her hand trembled with the desire for that final, terrible justice. But then she heard Thomas's voice in her memory, gentle and kind. "Violence answered with violence only creates more violence. Sarah, there has to be a better way." With tremendous effort, Sarah stepped back. "No," she said. "I won't give you the clean death you gave my husband. You'll stand trial. You'll face what you've done in the light of day." She bound Blackburn securely and dragged him toward the window as the gunfight outside reached its conclusion. Thornton's men were surrendering, the wealthy rancher himself being led out in chains. Federal Marshal James Wilson found Blackburn trussed like a turkey on his front porch an hour later, with a note attached. "This man murdered Thomas Reed and attempted to murder his wife, Sarah. The evidence of his crimes and those of Victor Thornton are documented in the attached papers. Justice must be served. Winter Storm." The trial that followed became legendary throughout the territory. Thornton and Blackburn both received lengthy prison sentences. The land they'd stolen was returned to rightful owners or put into public trust, and the woman known as Winter Storm vanished as mysteriously as she'd appeared. Sarah returned to her canyon sanctuary, where Gray Fox waited with knowing eyes. "It is done?" he asked. "It's done," Sarah confirmed, exhausted in body and spirit. "And now, what becomes of Winter Storm?" Sarah looked at her hands, scarred from months of hard living and fighting. She thought of Thomas, of their peaceful life together, of the woman she'd been before violence shattered her world. "Winter Storm did what needed doing," she said slowly. "But I don't want to be her forever. I don't want revenge to be what defines me. Gray Fox nodded approvingly. This is wisdom. But Sarah Winterhawk Reed, you cannot go back to who you were before. That woman died in the flames of your cabin. You must become someone new, incorporating all you have learned and experienced. Over the following months, Sarah worked with Marshal Wilson and former Sheriff Cooper to establish herself as a legal deputy marshal, the first woman to hold such a position in the territory. She used her unique skills to track criminals others couldn't find, to mediate disputes between native peoples and settlers, to protect those who had no one else to defend them. She also established a water trust in Thomas's name, ensuring the spring on her property would serve the community rather than enriching corrupt men like Thornton. The small cabin she built there became a school where she taught children, both white and Cherokee, to read and write, honoring Thomas's memory by continuing his work as an educator. Years later, when people spoke of Winter Storm, it was with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The legend grew. Some said she was still out there, protecting the weak and punishing the wicked. Others claimed she had been a spirit all along, summoned by injustice and returning to the spirit world once balance was restored. Sarah herself never confirmed or denied the stories. She simply continued her work, walking between worlds as her ancestors had done, carrying both her Irish father's and Cherokee mother's legacies forward into an uncertain future. On quiet evenings, she would sit beneath the cottonwoods where Thomas was buried and speak to him of her day, of the children she'd taught, of the wrongs she'd helped right, and sometimes when the wind blew just right, she thought she could hear his voice telling her he was proud. The outlaws who had stolen everything she loved had indeed failed to account for the Cherokee warrior blood in her veins. But more than that, they'd failed to understand that the human spirit, when pushed beyond endurance, could transform grief into strength, loss into purpose, and a woman determined enough could change not just her own fate, but the fate of an entire territory. Winter Storm had been born in fire and blood, but from those ashes had risen something more lasting: justice, healing, and the unshakable determination to ensure no one else would suffer as Sarah had suffered.